Cody Brown, star of Sister Wives TV show, has recently announced to the world that he is a member of the Apostolic United Brethren Polygamist group. Today we have an interview by an investigator who specializes in polygamist crimes. He is an author who has based his books on the crimes that he investigated. One of his most important crimes, and the biggest case that he ever handled, was a $1.5 million theft committed by the priesthood leaders of the Apostolic United Brethren.
There you go.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce to you John Llewellyn. Good morning, John.
Good morning.
John, today I'd like you to tell us about Hill versus Allred.
Well, it's a lawsuit that took nearly 20 years to comply with or to get a final resolution. We were 13 years in courts, going back and forth to the Utah Supreme Court and back to the District Court. But what it involves is the theft of $1.54 million from a lady named Virginia Hill. The defendants were Owen Allred, the leader of Apostolic United Brethren, J. Lemoyne Jensen, who is the current leader of the Apostolic United Brethren. Apostolic United Brethren as an entity was also a defendant. Jensen Lumber, the lumber company of Lemoyne Jensen, was a defendant. And there were 2 or 3 other defendants, John Putphin and a Dennis Matthews, who were the 2 men that actually took possession of the money and took it to Owen Allred. Make a long story short, Virginia was divorcing her husband in Detroit, and she converted all of her money. They were wealthy. He was a professional gambler, and she converted all of her assets to cash and sent it, some of it UPS and some of it she was transported by vehicle, and she brought it herself to her mother and uncle who lived in St. George, Utah. As it happened, her mother and her uncle were members of a small fundamentalist group in the making, headed by a man named John Sugar. Sugar talked Virginia into buying a ranch, and she was going to pay cash for it. She had accumulated $3.5 million in cash, and this John Sugar impressed her as a honest ecclesiastical member, and he was keeping all of that money in trust as she traveled back and forth to Detroit. Well, Sugar had been a bishop and a member in good standing with Apostolic United Brethren. He and Owen Allred together tried to purchase the Deseret Inn Ranch, which was the Las Vegas mob's recreational ranch in St. George, just outside of St. George, Utah. In a beautiful location. But he couldn't purchase the ranch himself because it had failed. There was a dispute between Owen and Sugar over who should pay what and how much. Anyway, to make a long story short, they both lost quite a bit of money and became bitter enemies over this failed purchase. But Sugar was obsessed with getting this ranch. But he couldn't purchase the ranch himself because he was on the outs with Herb Fletcher, the owner. So he enlisted the help of who he thought was a soulmate, a man by the name of Dennis Matthews, who was still a part of Apostolic United Brethren in good standing and somewhat of a confidant to Owen Allred. The purchase price was $1.5 million. Dennis Matthews said that it was just too much of a of a deal for him to handle. He just didn't have the expertise. So he wanted to bring in a good friend of his by the name of John Putfin, who was a realtor. But what he didn't tell John Sugart and Virginia is that John Putfin had had his license revoked because of unlawful activities he engaged in while a realtor. So they took possession of $1 million. They sealed it in food storage gallon cans to transport it to Salt Lake. The two men were together. Now, instead of purchasing the ranch or going about the mechanics of the purchase, they went directly to Owen Allred, who was their spiritual leader. Now, in those days, Owen Allred had the habit of tape recording all important priesthood meetings, and this was considered an important priesthood meeting. So in the meeting, Matthews and Putfin told him that a wealthy woman who wanted to repent for who knows what had donated a large sum of money to John Sugart, and John Sugart wanted Dennis to purchase the DI ranch. And they said that if he had this money and was able to purchase the DI ranch, he would be in a position to do a lot of harm to the AUB people. Well, these guys knew that Owen and Sugart were bitter enemies. So they asked him if he wouldn't inquire of the Lord to see what they should do with this money. Should they go ahead and purchase the ranch as they agreed to? Should they keep the money? Should they give it back? Just what should they do? Well, there's a little hesitation on the tape recording, and no one came back and said, we won't give the money back. We'll purchase the ranch for ourselves, and then we will pay off the Granite Ranch, which they already had possession of, and there was a mortgage on it. And so he says, we won't tell anyone because we're polygamists. Well, right after that, Owen ordained Dennis a bishop, making him an overseer of the money. At that time, the money was in Dennis's basement in his house. It was then transferred to Owen, who took possession of it and put it in the closet of his one of his plural wives, which was adjacent to his office in this duplex where he lived in Bluffdale. After about 3 months, 2 or 3 months, when they didn't hear from these guys, Virginia naturally panicked. And so she got Sugart, and she says, we've got to find Dennis and Putfin. So they came to Salt Lake City. They found Dennis Matthews. He was in the fireworks business at that time. And Dennis was able to convince them that John Putfin had run off with the money and he'd taken every cent. One of the words I quoted from Dennis saying is that he did not get 1 red cent. Well, within 2 weeks after they took possession of the first $1 million and Dennis was ordained a bishop, Dennis went back down to St. George with the plural wife, who I interviewed later. She had left him, and obtained the $500,000 for the final purchase. He was driving a brand new Lexus automobile that was purchased with Virginia's money. It was interesting. Sugart's wife, Dolly, asked Dennis, she says, what are you doing, Dennis, buying cars with our money? And Dennis just laughed it off. Now, she said our money, as if it was hers and Sugart's as well as Virginia's. And this is a symptom of the entitlement that these fundamentalists have. Sugart was had taken the position that that money should be his and that he should decide how it should be spent. In fact, Virginia found out later that he had taken steps to, they'd purchased some houses to have all of the houses put in his name, and then he had possession of the money. He was going to embezzle all of that money from her. I mean, he was no different than Owen and the rest of them in reality, but of course he pretended to be this honest, compassionate, religious leader. So anyway, she and Sugared and her uncle Danny Jackson went to Salt Lake, and after talking with Dennis Matthews, they decided that they would go see Owen Allred and ask for his help in locating John Putnam. Well, a man by the name of Ogden Kraut, who was a well-known fundamentalist in the Salt Lake area, he was an independent, but he was also a journalist and an author, and had written several very good books on Mormon fundamentalism. So Ogden arranged for the meeting. It was a little bit tense because of the differences between Owen and Sugar. But at that time, Sugar told Owen that the money belonged to Virginia. See, up until then, he was thinking that she had donated it to Sugar. She had not. So Owen at that time had the power, had he wanted to give the money back to her, and it would have avoided all of this embarrassment and the theft and the conspiracies and all of the stuff that went with it. But he didn't. What Virginia didn't realize is that not 20 feet away, her money was sitting in his wife Vera's closet in an apple box, a cardboard box. When I first interviewed Owen, he claimed that he didn't know anything about Virginia's money or Putnam or the theft or anything. And Putnam, after he got possession of the money, went to New Zealand and stayed there until after he thought the statute of limitations expired. But in the meantime, and up and before Virginia had gone there to talk to Owen, in fact, while this was going on, they were laundering money, had plans to launder money, $500,000, into AUB. And Putnam, who was the brains of this criminal conspiracy, had opened up several shell corporations to transfer the money through. One of the corporations was Diamond Automotive Specialties. It was the owner of a used car lot. They planned to buy cars and sell them and make some money. In the Articles of Incorporation, Lemoyne Jensen was a director of that corporation. However, I need to make something else clear. This is so convoluted and everything. They enlisted the help of a man named Jeff Norman and his wife Sarah to launder the money. And they opened up several accounts under the name of Last Resort Enterprises. And that's where all the money went to initially. From Last Resort Enterprises, the money was to go to Diamond Automotive Specialties, and from there it was going to Lemoyne Jensen, who was listed in the documents as the sole trustee of Apostolic United Brethren. And all of this laundering was to go on in $2,500 increments. Well, Jeff Norman and his wife, I mean, in a matter of days laundered many thousands of dollars into these different branch banks, and the banks, noticing this, notified the sheriff's office and the IRS, and an investigation ensued. Well, after I think it was 5 or 7 payments to Lemoyne Jensen as the trustee of AUB, they found out that there was an investigation going on, and they panicked. Lemoyne had his name taken off of the Articles of Incorporation of Last Resort Enterprises. And Owen gave the money to Putphin, says, get it out of here, get it out of here. Those are the words he told me he used. He said, get it out of here, get it out of here. So Putphin had the money. Well, Jeff Norman was arrested for structuring, and it's not quite clear, but Putphin helped the investigators in this way. Jeff Norman had an oil security scam going, and they had what they called a boiler room, where several people were making phone calls trying to initial people to invest in this oil exploration business. And he helped the authorities raid that oil securities boiler room. So anyway, to make a long story short, Jeff got a good attorney, a good defense attorney, and they made a deal with the federal prosecutors that he would plead guilty to structuring, which was a form of money laundering, if they would dismiss on the oil security scams and dismiss on his wife Sarah. So he pled guilty thinking that he would get probation. But part of the deal was that he had to tell everything about what happened, who was involved in the money laundering, where the money come from, and all that sort of thing. But the story he stuck to was that Putphin was a mafia guy and had threatened to harm his family if he didn't launder the money. Well, they knew that wasn't true. So what actually Jeff Norman was doing was keeping it quiet about Owen and Lemoyne's involvement in all this. Well, he went to prison for a year. I heard from some authorities that well, that airplane passing over, but they found marijuana in his possession, and he wound up serving 2 years in federal prison. While he was gone, AUB, Owen made sure that his family was still well taken care of. And after he got out, he was made a partner in a construction firm with another fundamentalist. Jeff and his family have since left AUB. He was named as one of the defendants, but the district judge says that inasmuch as he didn't receive any of the money personally and had spent the time in prison, why he dismissed, which didn't hurt my feelings. I interviewed Jeff a couple of times after he got out. He still stuck with that same old story that Putnam had mafia connections and this sort of thing. So, but anyway, I had a partner named Rod Williams who was with the Border Patrol, and he's the one who initially got me involved in the investigation. And Putnam, while he was in New Zealand, was calling Rod and furnishing little bits of information. Rod had been ostracized or expelled from AUB for asking embarrassing questions about their authority. And so Putphin, being very diabolical, a very bright guy, thought he could use Rod to embarrass Owen Allred. This thing is so convoluted and there are so many different stories. Putphin had a plural wife, the daughter of Joseph Thompson. Treated her terrible, really bad. Some of the things that he did just make you sick. And she left him, but she had a little baby, and it was Putphin's only biological baby. So Joseph and some of Joseph's sons were hiding the girl out. And Putphin hired detectives, helicopters looking for her. But anyway, he wanted Owen Allred to help him locate his biological daughter. Owen instead supported Joseph Thompson, and that made the two of them enemies. And Putphin is a ruthless man. When he has an enemy, he'll do whatever he can to destroy him. So that's what he wanted to do. And he told Rod that if he would cooperate with him and give him a certain affidavit, which Rod did, he embellished it so as to make Putphin happy. But Putphin said that he would give him evidence to show that that Owen Allred was actually involved in the theft of that money. Of course, he was thinking the statute of limitations was over, and it wasn't until after he thought the statute was over that he sent the tape recording to Rod. Well, all the time that they were having these conversations, I had given Rod a tape recorder with a device to record the conversations. So we were accumulating an awful lot of information. And
I'd like to ask about the original tape recording, the one that actually was made during the transition of the money.
Okay, during that initial meeting with...
Yes.
Okay.
Tell us about
All
that
right.
tape.
Well, I essentially have, and the substance of the tape was Owen, after consulting with the Lord, said that they were going to keep the money for themselves, and they were going to purchase the DI ranch and pay off the granite ranch.
So that was all on tape, and that's
all
the
on
tape
tape
that they're referring to in the court documents.
Oh yeah, it's part of the court record. In fact, I had it transcribed and certified, and it is also part of the court record. So anybody that wants to, it's public information, they can go down and obtain that transcript with the word-to-word verbalizations of what transpired in that meeting.
So Owen actually tape recorded the theft, even though they prayed over it, it was a theft. He tape recorded the theft, and that was the tape that actually found him guilty in the case.
Well, that was part of it. He also, what he did, after he got the tape recording, I went back and interviewed Owen, and I said, Owen, you told me that you didn't know anything about this money, but I have a tape recording here that says you knew everything about what happened to that money. And I have to hand it to him, he held his demeanor pretty well, you know, with hitting with that. But what he did is he went and got Dennis Matthews, had him come to his office there, and I played a copy, not the one that was sent to Rod, because that wound up in court, but we made a copy of it, and I played that copy for the two of them, see what their reactions were. Well, after Dennis had left, Owen told me, he says, you know, two men had come to me, and they had this box full of cardboard box full of money, gobs and gobs of money. And he showed me right the closet, pointed to the floor, and says it sat right there for the longest time. And I said, well, who were those men? Well, darned if I can remember. He says, I just can't remember. I said, well, how much money was in that box? And he says, I don't know, I didn't count it, but there were gobs and gobs of money. He says, and then I told him, get it out, get it out, get it out. And of course, what he was trying to do was convince me that he was innocent and was a victim of all this. But he also told me that John Putphin wanted to pay his tithing and gave him $30,000. So he deposited that $30,000 in, I don't know if his personal account or AUB account. He couldn't remember that either. But he said that when he found out the money was bad, why he gave Putphin, Putphin demanded his tithing back, is what he said. So he wrote him out a check for $30,000, but in the name of John Galt. And John Galt is the alias that Putnam used in opening a lot of these corporations and in purchasing the used car lot and various other monetary deals. And it's interesting that that Putnam got the name Galt from Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, the novel Atlas Shrugged, which has become somewhat of a cult in and of itself with this Ayn Rand.
I recognize that. I think it's important that we let our listening audience know that when Virginia went to ask Owen Allred about the money, and he said he knew nothing about the money or where the men were, it was actually about 20 feet from where they were talking in that closet.
That's right.
At that time, and he knew it.
Sure, he knew it, and he also knew where Putnam could be found. I mean, they were in the process of laundering the money and making these different purchases, cars, used car lot, and the whole works. And like I said before, he was in a position then to make things right with her, but he didn't. The next day, after she'd gone back to St. George, he called her on the telephone and assured her that neither him or Dennis had anything to do with the loss of her money. And then it was '94 that we discovered it. That's when Rod came to me.
Okay.
And it wasn't until 1997 that the complaint was filed. And so there was a lot of statute of limitation issues in the district court. But when Putnam went to New Zealand, the clock stopped. When he came back, the clock started up again. So we was able to keep him in. But the district court said all the other defendants, the statute had expired and dismissed on them all, except for Putnam. Well, we needed to get all of those others in. And so it went to the Utah Supreme Court. And the statute doesn't start until the victim of the crime finds out who the perpetrators were. She didn't find out until 1995 when Rod and I told her, after we had accumulated a certain amount of information.
I see.
So they sent it back to district court for trial. Well, all this has taken time.
I see.
And so anyway, you can see all of the stumbling blocks that we had.
Yes.
And at one time, it looked like we had gone as far as we could. My friend Paul Van Dam, he used to be the county attorney and also the attorney general, who was in private practice at that time. He was with a prestigious law firm here in Salt Lake. And he agreed to guide us on the civil procedures during the investigation. And we came to a point where it looked like we had hit a dead end. And Rod got discouraged, and he moved to Washington State. And Paul talked to his law firm, and they decided that it was going to be a long, expensive, convoluted lawsuit. And Virginia claimed she didn't have any money for to put down, which meant they would have to take it on a contingency basis, and so they declined. So I knew those guys were guilty. I knew all of them were, and Virginia claimed not to have money for a retainer. So I started writing letters to different law firms. I contacted all the old attorneys, defense attorneys, and prosecutors that I knew while I was a deputy sheriff. And I ran into one attorney, a defense attorney, and he said, gosh, I represented Putnam, and it'd be a conflict of interest. In fact, I found out it was he that represented him, telling him how he could go about on this money and pay taxes on it without getting the IRS involved. Another who was both a prosecutor and a defense attorney said, hey, John, I'd rather take their case than yours. This is the better case. So you can see the problems that we were having trying to find an attorney and build a case. But I happened to, I was still plugging along. Nobody seemed to, no attorneys wanted to take the case. And I was still trying to find some more evidence. And I was up at Ann Wild's house, who was the plural wife of Ogden Crowd, and I was friendly with them. And she introduced me to Tom Green, the infamous polygamist that was on all the television shows and everything. And he told me that he lived out in Snake Valley, which is where the Granite Ranch was located. And Rod and I had already determined that they had paid off the ranch 5 days after taking possession of the first $1 million. But because we couldn't show that actual money from Virginia went to pay off the Granite Ranch, the judge dismissed. He said that he knew Glenn Allred, who was the proprietor of the ranch, and he was a good man, and unless we could show that, he was dismissing. And well, our attorney at the time didn't object. But what's interesting is the Granite Ranch the people thought the Granite Ranch was part of AUB. It wasn't. It was registered under Red Cedar Corporation, and the owners of Red Cedar Corporation were Glenn Allred, who was Owen's favorite son, Owen Allred, and J. Lemoyne Jensen. They're the ones who owned the ranch. But they had people donating money towards the ranch, building it up, because it was supposed to be a place of refuge. It just shows you more deception and that goes on in Apostolic United Brethren, which I think is pretty epitomizes what goes on in all of these organized fundamentalist cults.
It's very interesting that the money was not only stolen from Virginia Hill, and later they did find that they were really guilty, that they really did, and the case was won, of course, in her favor, but that the people that were true followers in the AUB actually helped to pay that money back if they didn't pay the whole thing back, because they believed that Owen was taken advantage of and that it was tithing money in the first place. So they stole it twice. They stole it from Virginia Hill, and they stole it from their followers. Well, tell me how that happened. How did that work?
That's true. Now, you know, we had clear documentation in the court. There were a lot of people from AUB who attended all the court hearings. They had access to the Supreme Court decisions and rulings. But when Putphin set up this laundering scheme of the $500,000 into AUB, he filled out some papers called assignment of trust deeds. 2 different assignment of trust deeds, each for $25,000, and then totaling $500,000, excuse me. And in it, it showed the money coming from last resort to assignment to the used car lot, Diamond Automotive Specialties, and then to Lemoyne Jensen, the sole trustee of Apostolic United Brethren. It wasn't until after we had, before we filed the complaint and we got the attorney. Tom, I got to make all the connections here. Tom Green arranged for me to meet with Don Red, an attorney in Layton. Tom was the paralegal for him. I met with him, and he agreed to take the case on a contingency basis. Well, it was shortly after that, there were some of the documents that I had obtained from the county recorder's office and Diamond Automotive Specialties that showed Lemoyne Jensen as TR. To begin with, we thought it was trustee, or I mean not trustee, but a treasurer. But that was wrong, and so it just kept bugging me, and I went back, and you know, it's when you have a badge, it makes investigating an awful lot easier. But when you don't, you have to use your charm to get the cooperation of some people. And some place like the county recorder's office, I mean, you have to know what you're doing to dig in and find all of these different documents. Well, I was able to talk with this one fellow that worked there, and he agreed to help me. And that's how I come up with the 2 assignment of trust deeds. They were the frosting on the cake. Between that and the tape recordings, I mean, that was, the whole case was built around that tape recording and those documents, and of course the phony corporations, which I was able to find.
So Lemoyne had his name on the Diamond Auto as well, right in the beginning.
Right, right. His signature was there and everything. This whole thing, the whole laundering business, was an AUB operation. I asked Matthews, and during the part of the investigation, it was quite clear they were all defendants and everything, and they were afraid that the IRS was going to come down on them. I was hoping they would, because we were in contact with the criminal investigator for the IRS, who investigated the money laundering, and he was very cooperative. I gave him a lot of information, and he went to the I wanted to see these guys prosecuted criminally, and he went to the federal prosecutor, and they declined to prosecute, and I discerned it was because this was a polygamous cult, a religious cult, and they had had such bad experience at Waco and Ruby Ridge, they just didn't want to get involved anymore with that. In fact, I had Homeland Security contact me and other IRS investigators wanting to know about un-American activity on the part of some of these people up in Montana, that they might be involved, and a couple of them were, with some un-American white racist people up there. You find all of this involved in these cults, this sort of thing. But during the trial, Putphin defended himself, did an admirable job. The guy was really quite bright. And he convinced the judge that there was only one assignment of trust deed, which made an awful lot of difference in what the judgment would be, because they were accused of a criminal conspiracy, and under the RICO Act, which would have doubled the damages. So there was a lot at stake. That meant they had to go back to the Utah Supreme Court again. The Supreme Court rightly ruled that yes, there was two assignment of trust deeds, and yes, there was a criminal conspiracy. Right in their ruling, it says that defendants engaged in a pattern of criminal activity. That's organized crime, just a euphemism for organized crime. So anyway, it went back to the district judge, and we come up with a $6.5 million judgment.
So a $6.5 million judgment. And how in the world did you find a way to make them actually start paying back? Just because you had the judgment, I know it's hard to get the money. What did you do?
That's right. That's right. If they don't have the money, then you can't get it. Okay. So I found all of their property, and Virginia paid for it, and I had a title company search it out, and found out that Jensen Lumber was free and clear, and was worth well over a couple of $1 million, and where their endowment house was, where they do endowments and different rituals, and their meeting house in Bluffdale, it was free and clear, along with some other people. And anyway, the total value exceeded $6.5 million. I put liens on all of that property in behalf of Virginia Hill. So there was the inducement, and what they were telling these people, the feedback that we got out of AUB, is that you're going to lose your homes, your property, we're going to lose our temple, our meeting house, everything, unless you come up with money to help pay off this judgment. And the word that I got from reliable sources, that people were mortgaging properties, selling off ATVs, whatever they could to raise the money. They had different campaigns. They had a cart out by their meeting building with a big sign that says donate, and this is how you go about donating to help save the priesthood. And from what I can determine, it was the people who raised the money through tithing, donations, and selling off. You know, they sacrificed to save the priesthood and to save Jensen Lumber. All of the checks that Virginia came from Apostolic United Brethren. There wasn't anything that Owen had died in the process. There wasn't any checks that came from his estate. They claimed his estate was bankrupt. The estate did. I didn't see any checks come from Jensen Lumber. I don't know that Owen Allred, and I know Matthews never paid a dime towards the settlement. It all came from AUB, which means it came from the members of AUB.
Which means they fleeced their own sheep, which
Absolutely.
Means they stole it twice.
Absolutely. But you know what? They were true believers, and they didn't seem to mind. Though not all of them fell for that. I talked with some that made inquiries. They didn't all fall for it, but enough of them did. You know, they've got something like 7,000 members, And they come up with the money, which is, to Virginia's and her attorneys' benefits.
Right.
They're the ones who benefited the most, the attorneys.
Right. To clarify a point, Owen Allred was the leader of the AUB at the time that this took place, and Lemoyne Jensen is the current leader of the AUB. Is that not correct?
That's true. Owen Allred picked Lemoyne Jensen to succeed him after his death, and that's what happened. Now, the people had all of this evidence to show that their leaders were dishonest, crooks. But yet, some of them made inquiries, and I thought, gee, there would be a wholesale exodus from AUB, but there was only a handful of people that left. And it really puzzled me why these people would go ahead and continue to support these men. I found out that there is a mental, some mental acrobatics, I guess you could call it, called cognitive dissonance, where to recognize and admit the truth of something would be more traumatic than to make up excuses for their criminal behavior, as in this case. And I'm sure that this is what happened. And see, Owen and Lemoyne were supposed to be appointed by God. They are surrogate gods, actually surrogate gods. So in order to keep the people's investment into AUB, which is a way of life, it was simpler to say, hey, John and Rod were under the control of the devil, and he had given them the power to manufacture evidence which was admissible in court, which is one of the rumors that we heard. And then Owen said that she had actually donated the money and then had reneged. Well,
that's the story. That's the story I think most of them chose to believe.
Right.
Because in looking at reality, accepting reality requires accepting a logical behavior pattern.
And the consequences from that.
Right.
And the consequences were just too terrible for them to do, because, these people had built houses on priesthood property. They had invested, their whole lives revolved around the authority of the priesthood and their prophet. And, to start over would just be too traumatic for them.
The sad thing is that this is not the AUB's first encounter with crime. There were 3 fellows with high positions on the AUB that were cited for child molest in the past. Would you give us a little briefing on that?
Well, the structure of AUB is that you have the prophet, and then he has a council who are called high priest apostles. Now, these councilmen are at the same level as an apostle in the LDS church. So these men too are supposed to be appointed through the inspiration of God or through revelation. Everything, is spiritual in these things. Okay, 3 of these men were ostracized or kicked out of AUB for allegedly molesting their daughters. One of them, Chevreau Palacio, now, one of his victims told her school counselor, she was in public school, and it became public information, and so there was a real criminal investigation. But the other 2 was handled by a priesthood court, and the rumors were going around in AUB at the time that these 3 men were doing something terrible involving their daughters, but the priesthood or the leadership was covering it up. And it wasn't until it became so obvious and everything that they finally had to take some action. Now, this Chevreau Palacio, I heard from reliable sources that the mother of one of the victims, and she was also victimized also. I won't go into the story because it's too damn disgusting. But had gone to Lemoyne Jensen on 2 occasions to get him to get Chevreau to stop messing around with these little girls. And Lemoyne allegedly talked to him, but didn't do any good. But when it became public information and the authorities started to investigate, Lemoyne acted as if it was news to him, you know. But you know, this is common in all of these cults. They try to cover up and handle these things themselves, and it seldom works. You know, while I was a deputy sheriff, I specialized in sex crimes investigation. I taught sex crimes at the police academy, and I gave sex crimes seminars all through the state of Utah. And this crime committed by Chevrolet Palacio was about as nefarious and disgusting as any I investigated while in deputy. And they have problems in these groups. AUB using an example, because I was part of AUB for 20 years. I was not a real integral copy because I was so busy taking care of my life and my family and earning a living that I wasn't part of the establishment. And I didn't learn to what a corrupt organization, well, I had suspicions. You know, when they claim to be infallible, you know, that sends a red flag up to me,
Yeah.
you know, shortly afterwards. And so I was just on a fringe. But the women have to have this illusion of authority to justify a plural marriage so that you're not committing adultery or fornication. So I think a lot of men who really don't go along with all that priesthood baloney or believe it, go along with it for their wives, and that's where the Y chromosome comes in.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many different facets and subjects you could write. Well, I've written 5 books, and I have one of them is on my blog, polygamybooks.org, on the internet. There's so many things that you could talk about. You know, Warren Jeffs. There's more reality in what he was doing, molesting all those little girls, and the people condoning it, and the different terrible things that occurred in the FLDS. There's more reality there than there is in all this Cody Brown stuff and Big Love stuff. All that is designed to do is to anesthetize the public towards the crime and the corruption and the abuse which is endemic to this type of a lifestyle.
You brought up Cody Brown. Cody Brown went into an interview on the Salt Lake Tribune, and he mentioned that he was a member of the AUB. That's
right. I read that, and then I've heard from sources inside AUB that he was a member. And when Lemoyne Jensen heard that he was thinking of going on this reality show, he advised him against it and said that if you should go ahead and get on the show, you're not to discuss the religion and you're not to mention AUB. And that's understandable because, you know, AUB's got a lot of skeletons. And of course, Virginia Hill is the biggest skeleton.
Well, that's true, but even though the AUB has been exceptionally good at con artist work and working the system and working their own people to get them to be responsible where they won't, Cody's pretty good at working the system too. Yet he went on the air saying that he did not receive any public funds while his wife Christine was receiving food stamps while they were filming on TLC. What do you think of that?
It's all deception and illusion. Well, I'm not surprised. You know, how many people in the fundamentalist subculture, every once in a while somebody's going to be the hero and get the bigamy statute decriminalized. You know, there was Alex Joseph, for one, who was a publicity hound, a narcissist. Tom Green, another narcissist. Here you have Cody Brown, a narcissist. Now there's some Darger family, Joe Darger and others, in a new book that has come out. You can see some narcissism involved in all of this. But these people that are put out for the public display do not epitomize the true nature and what exists in the subculture. If you want to know what Mormon polygamy is really like, you want to go to mid-level or below in these different groups and see how these people are struggling, how they're being exploited by their leaders, just as all of these people were exploited to raise $6.5 million for Virginia Hill.
I want to thank John Llewellyn for sharing his wisdom, his writings, and his knowledge with us. People do not change because we legislate laws. They change because they become educated and we change their thinking. Education is liberation.